I'm good. I'm so excited for it. So, can we see if we can do this? Okay. I'm here. Yeah, I'm here. I just put up all the time. Yeah, I'm feeling, finally that I'm so excited. I usually doing something like mentally. I'm so excited. I'm so special. Well, I think it's a fun platform. And the good news is that we didn't hear it from this platform. It's free. It's completely free. And I just looking across, I actually contacted a few companies, but they were really, really expensive, like over $1,000, and just like afford it. So we can you literally drive on this platform because it's no cost. This platform has so much space for growth. It has implementation, and we have done a lot of we have workshop and to get our facilitators familiar with this platform. But I was really, really nervous, and but everything was going well, and then so glad that we did improvement and
Mr. Keys, what an amazing job that you have done organizing this virtual conference. It's really, really been fantastic. All right, I think we should probably get started, right? We're about 3 minutes after. And greetings, Dr. JoLLE. Your ears are gonna burn during this presentation. So yeah, I'm just gonna jump right in. I wanna respect that it is the end of a really beautiful weekend. And like Dr. JoLLE did, I'm gonna start with a land acknowledgement. I want to acknowledge, like, I'm calling in from Kumeyaay territory, that's San Diego. And I also want to acknowledge the territory that this conference sort of is taking place at University of Georgia, Athens, which is Muskogee, Cherokee, and Yuchi land. And there is also many other Native nations and contemporary Native people who have relationship to that land. I want to do a shout out to Oakland, California, because that's really the closest thing to home territory, and that's Ohlone territory. So as you can see from this map, that right here, this is the Pacific. Oh, you can see my mouse, right? There we go, cursor. So this is the dividing line, the U.S.-Mexico border. And so Kumeyaay territory actually stretches well into Mexico. There are the largest number of Native American tribes, tribal reservations and nations in San Diego County than any other county in the country. Oops, I accidentally did what I didn't want to do. All right, so lately, the Kumeyaay actually have been fighting the construction of the border wall, and they've been doing this during COVID. So these are members of the Kumeyaay Nation and allies. And this is one of the many different fences and walls that separate the United States and Mexico. And it is going through their sacred territory, and all their territory is sacred, but it's particularly some specific mountains that are being changed. And it changes the course of the waters and the rivers, the border wall. Here's another sign, no wall, native land. This man to the right actually is my teacher, that's Dr. Stan Rodriguez. And here they are practicing bird singing. So these are the songs of creation, the songs for funeral, the songs of mourning. I'm not sure which one was taking place right here at this moment. Let me see, I guess you didn't get this screen share. Let me do that again, sorry. Here we go. Thanks for chatting with me, because I didn't notice. All right, so this was the picture I was referring to, and let's see if this works. No wall, native land. The border protests, and this is the maps of Kumeyaay territory, and this is Georgia with the Muskogee, Yuchi, and Cherokee territories. All right, so I want to ask people, actually, if you would like to, and you know the indigenous land that you're on, if you'd like to throw in a land acknowledgement right now into the chat. And if you don't know the specific land that you might be on right now, here's a resource that might be helpful. And again, if you want to name the land, but also maybe any intentionalities you have around that, that'd be great. Like, and I'm acknowledging the land in hopes that my words today are going to be a right relationship to the territory I'm on, the territory that the conference is taking place, the Ohlone territory in Oakland, California, but also wherever you might be. While you're looking into that, I want to also give a word of thanks to the entire staff of JoLLE, the journal. And I can't name all of you, but I've met many of you, I know. I'd like a special shout out to the conference co-chairs, Yishuan and Swang, and then the faculty advisors, Peter and Usri. Usri, thank you for your opening, but also Peter for your many, many, many years of supporting and mentoring scholars of color. I think this is your last year, so I just want to say thank you so much for all these years of commitment and dedication. And everyone who attended this conference with your full hearts, even though you had full plates and you're fully fatigued from the Zoom life, thank you so much. this, moving to the next slide. There we go. All right. So this next slide, just while we're on this topic, there is this research project by High Country News, and it's called Land Grab Universities. And this details how many of our universities are land grant universities. And what that means is more than what it sounds. So like this picture of University of California, you'll see the red dot here. I think that's UCOP, that's the Office of the President. But all these lines and dots represent all the lands that are bought and sold and resold in order to fund the University of California. And so land grab universities, as they're calling it, they're funded not just to build on land, but they actually are funded through land, through the buying and selling and speculation of land. And here is actually University of Georgia. So you'll notice that even the lands that went to fund University of Georgia, some might even still be owned by UGA today, stretch over many states. And this sort of expropriation of turning land into property and selling it, it might feel very familiar to you because it probably feels a bit like the expropriation of human beings who are enslaved and then bought and sold and then fund universities as well. So there's a connection between indigenous land and as property in humans, and particularly enslaved Africans, but also folks from the Caribbean and from North America being bought and sold in order to fund our projects. And what this means for me is that it is hard to simply see our work when we talk about decolonization as doing diversity work, inclusion work, or even decolonizing our syllabi or decolonizing our classrooms, when our very work is predicated upon the university, those of us who are in the university, and is predicated upon stolen land and differently stolen bodies. So this is the complexities of decolonization and colonization that I'm hoping that we're going to get into a little bit today. All right, so title of my talk is Literacy for Solidarity, or How to Honor Ancestors Not Our Own. And I'm going to be riffing off of Dr. JoLLE a lot. And this is actually more than just because you're brilliant and you've moved us, but also this is a kind of methodology for me where I'm drawing from Audre Lorde's ideas, that I'm not making up these things. I don't own these ideas. They've been spoken to me, I've heard them, and I'm trying to share them with you because I think they were meant for you. Maybe not, maybe they weren't even meant for my ears sometimes, but they're meant for you. Audre Lorde actually says there are no new ideas, there are only new ways of making them felt. And that's what I'm hoping to stay true today. And just a little bit of overview, I'm hoping to talk about ancestor accountability and then woke work, wake work, and hopefully get to land pro-Blackness and decolonization. Again, hearing Dr. JoLLE's charge and challenge, I am, if I feel safe and sincere in doing so, I'm going to try to do a little archaeology of self myself and talk about something I never talked about, which is the state of being Asian in this country with respect to land pro-Blackness and decolonization. So let's see how far we get. So JoLLE gave us this, I loved so many things you said, I wrote them down, and you said, what type of ancestor will you be? This really echoed and resonated with a lot. I've heard almost this exact phrase spoken by Winona LaDuke, who is the Native environmentalist, economist, writer of the Ojibwe White Earth Reservation. I've heard this from Karina Gold, who is a Chochenyo Ohlone Native woman, founder of Sogorea Te Land Trust, which is an urban land trust run by Native women in the open area. I've heard it from Eve Tuck, who's a Hunanga scholar at the University of Toronto, and also my dear friend, and I think many of you probably read her work. So what type of ancestor will you be? How can we make sure that our actions today make us good ancestors for the future? And something else you said, JoLLE, is that you said that you're calling on Maya Angelou as an ancestor, even though she is not necessarily your genetic ancestor. And I want to say, I think, JoLLE, that Maya Angelou is your ancestor. And she actually wrote it down in this book, Letter to My Daughter, which I listen to often on audiobook. You can hear Dr. Maya Angelou speak this out loud. Angelou had no biological daughter. And this is what's kind of significant about this idea of Letter to My Daughter. And she writes in there, I gave birth to one child, a son, but I have thousands of daughters. You are Black and white, Jewish and Muslim, Asian, Spanish-speaking, Native American, and Ally. You are fat and thin and pretty and plain, gay and straight, educated and unlettered, and I'm speaking to you all. Here's my offering to you. So her book is dedicated to all the women who allow her to mother them, near and far, present and future. She can speak in the lives of those who can hear it, you, her unmet daughters, be you cis or not, Black or not, hearing or not. So when I think about honoring ancestors not my own, I think about what you said, Dr. JoLLE. And I never knew either of my biological grandmothers, and still I feel the repercussions of their heartbeats, and also the heartbeats of grandmothers not my own. And I always think about when I do organizing, how to organizing like your grandmothers. That is to honor their complex desires for your future, for a life beyond survival. So JoLLE, just to address you directly, and I'll stop doing this after a while. I want to be accountable to your grandmothers, your ancestors, chosen or not. I want to be accountable to my ancestors. Another set of ancestors I'm thinking about right now is actually Peggy Jo Morrill, who is Klamath Modoc. And she was a painter, artist, all these amazing things. This is one of her paintings, and it was painted in 2014. It's called Watches Over Us. And you can see you have the family in the foreground and all the children, all the future. And in the background, you have the ancestors watching over them. So this is actually a remake of this painting by Peggy Morrill by the Super Futures Haunt Collective. So the Super Futures Haunt Collective is a contemporary artistic group that I have connections to. That's why I'm in the photo. I'm not usually in their artwork, but they recruited me that time. And but these are also people who are near and dear to me that I consider family. So in the one of the members is Angie Morrill, who is the daughter of Peggy Morrill. And Peggy Morrill is actually sitting here in her wheelchair. And this is Angie. And this is Angie's son, Leroy. And Angie is the author, she's Dr. Angie Morrill. She's the author of Decolonizing Feminism, along with Miley Arvin and Eve Tuck. She's the director of Indian education for Portland Schools today in Portland, Oregon. She is my good friend and my family, the daughter of Peggy Morrill. Her son here is smiling, Leroy Morrill, and that's why this is called an outtake, because he was supposed to look all serious and solemn like me, right? But we love this photo, and I wanted to share it today. I will say that Leroy was actually killed 2 Fridays ago, and I think many of you may know this already, but it is hard whenever your family becomes an ancestor, and it's hard when children become ancestors early in their journey. It's hard for me to give a public talk today when I'm still in prayer for him, but I think Leroy would have liked this. He was really active in those epic BLM protests in Portland, Oregon, and he really, really enjoyed and he loved being Indigenous. So Leroy, I want to be accountable to your ancestors, chosen or otherwise. I want to be accountable to Peggy Morrill. And the last thing I want to think about in terms of accountability ancestors is land as an ancestor. And this is a very Indigenous concept. And I think that I've heard this from many Indigenous people, certainly, but also Black folks. And that has to do with the way that Blackness and indigeneity has traveled or not traveled, been torn apart and been sewn back together since the Middle Passage and beyond. And land as first ancestor and land as the producer of knowledge. And so a land acknowledgement for me is really only the first step. It means that we intend to learn how to be accountable to this land and to the Indigenous peoples of this land. And this is a image from Sogorea Land Trust, which I mentioned earlier. That's the back of Karina Gold. She's got their slogan, rematriate the land, which means not only return land to Indigenous people, but restore and regenerate human relationships to the land and therefore to one another. And that is at least the basic definition of decolonization that I hold. And this is part of Land Relations Super Collective, Segura Te is a member of. It's a collective of many collectives working on land relationships. Which I might speak to that later. The Native Hawaiian professor and scholar and educator Noelani Goodyear Kaopua says that all of us are differentially positioned vis-a-vis land and ancestors. And yet we all should be accountable based on our specific relationships to land and ancestors. And so mine is different from JoLLE's. JoLLE's is different from yours. So this kind of recognition doesn't relieve anyone of their responsibilities, but rather acknowledges that we all have different social, genealogical, and spatial locations. This is Dr. Noelani speaking. And to be accountable and to honor ancestors, not our own, to me, we have to remember the land. So I guess I'm not going to read this whole quote, but I've been reading Alexis Pauline Gumbs' Undrowned. So Alexis Pauline Gumbs is a queer Black feminist, writer, independent scholar, and she writes about marine mammals in Undrowned, so like dolphins and whales and those kinds of things. And she sees them as her kin, and she sees them as ancestors, and she understands this sort of relationship beyond the human, right? So, and she writes about out here in the open ocean, mothering is an emergent strategy. So meaning like taking care of each other, these whales and dolphins swimming in this toxic environment, fleeing from death, right? Fleeing from the whaling trade, from nets, from military sonars, right? And she writes about these different groups of dolphins that actually swim with each other across species. She says they travel in hundreds, sometimes thousands. And sometimes they invite other, like again, species, but also whales, and even sharks sometimes travel with them. And so this kind of queer kinship that she's getting at, these queer relations that are recognizing beyond species are relatives, and that she's drawing from that to say we need to learn how to be good relatives. In order to do that, we have to do deep work. She calls it depth work, which really resonates with what Dr. JoLLE said yesterday. In a community like Oakland, and I think that some of you will relate to this, these are communities that are regularly harmed. And sometimes those who do the harm are in the community, as well as those who receive the harm. And again, this is sort of like the idea that sometimes sharks swim with these ponds of dolphins and whales. And like JoLLE said, this is the hard work. This is the dirty work of critical love. Like, how do you be together despite all those harms? And that's also where I'm trying to get at. So today, there's this idea of being woke. So I don't think I need to explain that. And I think about Goldie Mohammed, Professor Goldie Mohammed's work, who's at the University of Georgia, who writes about an equity framework for literacy. And there's 4 parts to it: identity, development, skill development, intellectual development, and criticality. So to me, this is like the criticality part, but also drawing from our critical love Sifu, JoLLE. For those of you who couldn't see on the screen yesterday, I thought I should put it up today. I hope you don't mind. And this is the racial literacy development model that Dr. JoLLE was talking about yesterday. And for me, the idea of woke work is this historical literacy. Like, how do we understand our historical roots to our current contemporary condition? This is hard work. And I want to point out, I think on this model, it's the easiest work. So I think that archaeology itself is harder, interruption is harder, humility is harder. Historical literacy is something that any educated person ought to do and can do. And today specifically, I want to talk about historical literacy in settler colonialism in the plantation. And this is something I think is not thought about enough in terms of critical literacy, and it's not thought about enough even when we talk about white supremacy. So white supremacy is real, and it's analyzed in particular ways that are sometimes simplistic, I'll say, and it doesn't always offer us enough to understand why decolonization is so hard and what work needs to be done. And that's why I want to add to this idea of historical literacy, this view of settler colonialism in the plantation. So I hope you all are still with me. I am on the PowerPoint now, so I should, oh, here we go. Turn slide. So I can't see you for a minute. You're here. Thank you, Merida. Okay, so where was I? Oh yeah, I was sharing my screen and I unshared it by accident. Sorry, so Goldie is at Georgia State, not UGA. And the screen hopefully is still sharing. So Catherine McKittrick is a Black feminist scholar who actually helps me read the work of Sylvia Wynter. I think that's what she does for a lot of us. And Sylvia Wynter is the great Caribbeanist philosopher, Black woman, who's recently retired from Stanford University. And she writes that the plantation is the blueprint for our contemporary troubles. And she means spatial, she means racial troubles. She writes that the plantation normally contains a main house, an office, a carriage house, barns, a slave auction block, and a garden area, slave quarters and kitchen stables, and a cemetery, buildings where crops are prepared, that kind of thing. But plantation towns are also linked to transport, rivers, roads, small rail networks that enable the shipping of crops, of enslaved people and other commodities. And so this geographic process, she says, becomes the economic structure that would underpin town and industry development in the Americas. The spatial architectures of transport, imprisonment, and resource extraction sustained the plantation in today's capitalist economy is not that different. It's just a lot more sophisticated, much more expansive in geographies. So that instead of barns and blocks, you have brown people and Black people kept at a much greater socio-political distance from the amenities of the plantation homes, what we see today. Even our solar panels that make us more sustainable, they leave toxic landscapes in China. Tesla home batteries are fracked from indigenous lands in the salt flats of the Andes. Master planned suburbs don't even have jails anymore because they simply move the cage people out elsewhere to other townships. So for McKittrick, we're really living the science fiction future of the plantation. As a sort of painful present day example, Ahmaud Arbery was murdered while jogging through a plantation, at least through a plantation, a geography shaped by these same logics. He was jogging through a suburban housing development just within distance of his own home across a small, the US Route 17 in Georgia, Brunswick, Georgia. And his crime was really violating this architecture of the plantation by exploring new home construction not meant for him in a mostly white suburban neighborhood. And if you think about how it went down, a white resident was alarmed by Arbery's Black presence, called the police. Police referred the resident to local vigilantes, who then chased down Arbery, shot him, and they were not arrested. So the whole operation smacked of plantation logic, of Jim Crow, of Black codes. The crazy thing is that Georgia is actually the land of preserved historic preservation, preserved historic plantations. And that's because plantations are not just places, they're not just racial architecture, they're also the stories we tell about the very founding of this country. And I think you're familiar with Jamestown 1619, is sometimes seen, it's narrated mythologically as the first European presence in North America. Technically not true, but it's narrated as such. And it's narrated as the first sustainable settlement. And the weird thing is it actually failed many, many times. And people kept starving to death. They had to shut down. They had to start back up again. And Kate McCoy, who is a scholar of education and environment, describes that even while this Jamestown was making record profits by harvesting tobacco and sending it to Europe, they were actually starving to death. And this contradiction of record profits while starving to death is what they were trying to solve. And what they did, what finally sustained the plantation was slavery. So in August of 1619, the Virginia Company purchased 20 abducted people from Africa. This move was really significant because it reinvented race. Race always existed, racism has existed for quite some time. But it's always being reinvented. As Malcolm X says, it's like a Cadillac. They make a new model every year, right? So, but this particular move has shaped North America, and I think much of the Americas, where around the logic of property, where people become property. So Black people become property, land becomes property. And by doing so, they allowed white indentured servants to own land that they would continue to seize and continue to steal. And therefore, white people became property owners. And this comes to property comes to define whiteness, it comes to define indigeneity, and it comes to define Blackness in three very different ways, right? Where Black people as property, as people who should not ever own property under this logic, as people who will always be dispossessed. Land, indigenous land, their ancestor becoming property, and indigenous people as being removable, people who have to be eradicated. And then finally, white people as property is the twisted part, because that is actually our source of our concept of rights. So everything that we think of as our right, whether it's inclusion to the university, whether it is voting, whether it is the ability to enter the middle class or get an education, it is connected to property. And that is generally unquestioned, but that is also why decolonization is so hard. We call this, people study settler colonialism, call this the settler colonial triangle, which I think is interesting because it's Jamestown was shaped like a triangle. And but I just want to point out that settler colonialism doesn't organize us into a line. It's not even a pyramid. It's not even just a racial hierarchy. It is twisted. It is twisted, these three twisted relationships that has continued to twist all our relationships to one another. It twists our relationships into violent ones. So Cheryl Harris actually talks about this, where whiteness is as property. It's the unspoken premise by which we sometimes imagine how we're going to exercise our own freedom struggles on this land. These are some images. This is a mural at Colorado University Boulder. As you can see, then your luxuries are displacement, romantic nationalism. These things are all based upon the theft of ancestors, the dividing of ancestors into pieces of property. And again, I think there's some resonance here probably between Black experience and Indigenous experience. I don't think they're mutually exclusive. Skip that picture. So moving on, I'm trying to get to archaeology of the self. And this is these images are Fania Davis, who's a civil rights attorney, a restorative justice practitioner, a writer and a scholar. She's got a PhD in Indigenous education. I believe she's based in Oakland. Comes from a very famous family of activists. Elena Eagleshield is a Lakota educator and mother. Also was in her 20s at Standing Rock Encampment, and she founded a school there for the children. That's Minnie-Wachoni Water Protector School. And I'm lucky and grateful to have been part of a group of people who organized a conversation between the two. I just want to shout out Django Paris, Ray Paris, and Timothy San Pedro as some of them. And in this conversation, Fania Davis really does this archaeology of self, this archaeology of the complex relationship that Black people have to settler colonialism. And she mentioned specifically to Lena, Buffalo soldiers, that is Black soldiers who fought in the Civil War and then were recommissioned to fight in the so-called Indian wars against the Lakota people and others. And thus like striving for inclusion and citizenship through military service and freedom that way are participating in the expanding of the US empire. And she talked about that, and Elena's response was amazing. And she said, and I'm sort of paraphrasing, although we may have met each other as enemies before, this time we greet each other as relatives. So this archaeology of self, to me, this hard work that Dr. Yoli is talking about, it made me think of this example of how to be accountable to each other's ancestors. We see that in this relationship between Fania Davis and Elena Eagleshield. So I'm going to transition into wake work, which is, I'm drawing heavily from Christina Sharp's book, In the Wake. And she's talking about this idea of the wake. She has three definitions for the wake. It's sort of a metaphor. One is the wake is that time you spend with a relative who's just died. You're in their presence, you're holding them in their passage, even though they are dead. The second definition is the wake behind a ship, and she is specifically referring to the wakes behind the ships of the Middle Passage, and how Black people live in these wakes, like in this wake of always holding the people whose life is subject to premature death, and in the wake of the Middle Passage. And then the third definition is a bullet when it traces a path through the air, that is also called a wake. So imagine being behind the wake of a bullet. And she talks about this wake work as this deep work of how to be with each other, how to hold each other, how to mother one another, to connect back to Alexis Pauline Gumbs, even when people are not your genetic descendant or your genetic ancestor. But it is that Blackness has taught people to do this, and particularly the Blackness, the Black brilliance that's required to survive anti-Blackness. So the archaeology of self for me, when I was listening to Dr. JoLLE speak about this, is I was thinking about how woke work, which I mentioned earlier, or the critical literacy, is actually the easiest of the hard work. It's in some ways the most superficial, but interrogating our relationships to whiteness is actually relatively easy work. Woke work is convenient, and Audre Lorde actually challenges us. She says, do not pretend to convenient beliefs, even when they are righteous. You will never be able to defend your city while shouting. I think about wake work as the harder work. It includes interrogating our relationship to one another, as twisted as they can be because of colonization. So the convenience of white supremacy is the claim that we are the victim and therefore innocent of someone else's colonization. And I've actually never met anyone who is not a victim of white supremacy, including white people. So those settlers in Jamestown were starving to death even as they were killing people, enslaving people, stealing land. Maybe we are guilty of the same thing. Maybe we are starving to death too. So as archaeologists, I hear the challenge that we have to dig deeper. Thinking about my own positionality as an Asian person, Asian is this geopolitical area that has its own colonizers and its own colonized. And often the people who now in the United States are seen as Asian are each other's historical or even present day colonizers. If you and I were to go to the Philippines, or if I were to go, I have Filipino God family. If we were to go, we'd be positioned very differently. If we were to go to China, we'd be positioned very differently. If we went to Laos, if we went to Taiwan, where it's Chinese settlers and the Aboriginal territory, we're positioned differently. If I go to Hawaii, I'm positioned differently, right? So there's a way in which these Asian histories and positionalities are collapsed into one thing when we come into this country, or when we're in this country. And so we have to analyze colonization in specificity to place and in specificity to one another. And when we do an archaeology of self with respect to colonization, it is respect to place and in relationship to one another. It isn't just with respect to whiteness and white supremacy. So colonizers don't always look white. There may be a time, a place, and a people for whom I look like your colonizer. I would challenge all of us to ask when and where and to whom we are the colonizer. So now I'm going to get into some challenging material. So I think probably you know this image, and it's, I apologize for holding it up, and I won't keep it up very long. But this is, in the foreground is To Tao, who is a Hmong police officer, and he is sort of forming this human barrier between him and Chauvin, who is killing George Floyd in the background. And so I'm just going to move off of that image, but I think it was important to show. And it's important to show because I'm going to be drawing from Viet Thanh Nguyen, who is the winner of the Pulitzer Prize, the Vietnamese author or the sympathizer. And he said that it's that moment of turning your back, of policing the crowd, the crowd who's trying to stop the murder. That is the Asian American model minority moment. Really interesting. So he's saying that moment of turning your back to the horror and forming the racial police line. That's the Asian American model minority moment. And that is the moment where Asians are called in to be this wedge group, right? I'm deliberately starting with this as a present day moment because it has a historical trace and it has a legacy. It has something that we actually need to understand better. It's not as simple as Asians are anti-Black. I'm not arguing that point, but it is this idea of the racial police line in the wedge group. And in my understanding of my own positionality within the university, within my relationships with you, and within the white supremacist attacks that we are seeing today. And just to draw this out, universities are position Asians as a wedge group. And you can see this in the form of lawsuits right now where they're literally recruiting Asians to say, please sign in as a plaintiff to sue your university for essentially Black admissions and brown admissions. I believe in the case of the Harvard lawsuit, thankfully, they couldn't find a single Asian student who would be willing to do that. But the fact that Asians are called to do that work, to be the racial police line, is this strange reality of what it means, I think, this reinvention of race that is always happening. The other thing that I thought about is that Hmong people fought the secret wars for the CIA in Southeast Asia. And they were the bodies who fought and died in those wars. And that is Total's background. And that's why his family is here. And that's how he becomes a police officer, right? Is this actual racial wedge group for empire, for colonization, for the Cold War. This image I have up here right now, Down a Dark Stairwell, it is a film by Ursula Leung, which I think that anyone interested in this should watch. It is about the murder of Akai Gurley in 2014, an unarmed Black man who was killed by Peter Liang, who was a Chinese police officer in Brooklyn. So the killing mobilized two large community demands and movements. One was justice for Akai Gurley, but surprisingly, the other was for Chinese Americans who claimed that Liang was a scapegoat because he was Asian. I think we know that both are true, and that is the hard work of colonization. That is the twisted work. You and I, who study Indigenous studies, Black studies, and critical race theory and ethnic studies, we study to be better relatives. We study to understand how our struggles are connected. To be honest about my privilege, to be honest about how my privilege might be complicit in your oppression. Ethnic studies is not just ethnocentric, it's not just about pride, it's not just about one's own ethnicity, it's a relational understanding of race, indigeneity, of Blackness, of justice. In studying, we are cultivating our fluency, our literacy in self and others, in one and another. We'll take the time. So, this is an image. So I want to do a historical trace of that. So as we all learned, it's kind of like this Asian American history 101. It's like Chinese built the railroad. Even though 99% of Asian immigration has happened since that time, and many of us maybe do not claim genetic ancestry through the folks who did work and die on the railroad. And what we learn is the discriminatory, racist, violent experience where I think it's something like for every 3 miles of track laid, there are 2 Chinese people who die. So think about that next time I'm on the train. I'll think about that. And most people did not speak out against this. One person who did was Frederick Douglass. And Frederick Douglass, incredibly brilliant, sophisticated person, he understood that these Chinese laborers were being presented as a wedge group with Black people. And he understood this in such complexity. He first understood the hypocrisy of it. He said, how are they different from the Germans? How are they different from any other group? It's because you, he gave the speech in Boston, he's like, you, meaning like talking largely for white people, present them as culturally different, as culturally deviant, as pathological, as this racial other. And you know, he understood that process. And he's like, that's hypocritical because we know that that is the reinvention of race. He also knew that this was a real thing, that Chinese laborers were in fact being hired to compete with Black freedmen, that in fact this would enable both cheap labor, continued discrimination against Black people, and a reemergence of the South as this white supremacist power post-Reconstruction, because now you had an economic force that could compete with the Black economic force that was building. So knowing that, he says all this in his speech, he still spoke for the humanity of these Chinese laborers. And this is I would say the archaeological work that Frederick Douglass was doing. And I want to bring this up just as this point that we're not taught about Chinese laborers in that way. We're taught about Chinese laborers in this ethnocentric way that's somehow supposed to represent some kind of larger Asian American struggle and minoritization. And I think it's very dangerous. I think we need to think about it as the presentation of Asians as this wedge group to be this racial police line. And it's bad to be that racial police line because you will also die, right? You may not die in the same fashion and numbers as people who die from anti-Black violence, but that is the function of that racial police line. So I'm getting to this because we are in this period where you know, it's really hard to imagine a radical Asian politics. I'm not that involved with it. There are people who are, but I want to gesture, and I will mention some of those folks, but I want to gesture towards this idea that we are in relation and that there is a possibility for a kind of pro-Black Asian politics specifically. So going back to Frederick Douglass, you know, I would say Frederick Douglass had a pro-Black radical imagination, right? And what is amazing about his radical imagination was in fighting for liberation, he also could fight for people who were in some ways ethnic competitors, right, to Black people. And that's what pro-Blackness is to me. Pro-Blackness isn't the inverse of white supremacy. It isn't Black supremacy. Pro-Blackness is everything that white supremacy is not. And when I think about Frederick Douglass, I also think about Stacey Abrams, who possibly saved the planet. And Stacey Abrams, in combating voter suppression and increasing the Black vote, she increased the Asian vote in Georgia, right? So this is what pro-Black politics are. When you Google like Asian activists, like I don't know if it's my algorithm, but very little shows up, right? One of the people who shows up is Yuri Kochiyama, who's here with Malcolm X. She was famous for being there the moment he was assassinated. I'm lucky to have met Yuri Kochiyama in person. It's one of those things of being of a certain generation. And I think there are such examples. I'm going to fast forward a little. These are contemporary modern day Asian abolitionists. C.J. Cotton Candy is a Filipina, Pinay, obviously a DJ, educator, organizer of the Asian Solidarity Collective, among other things. She works on abolition. Rachel Kuo, I believe is Chinese American, founder of Asian American Feminist Collective, but also an abolitionist, more from a scholarly perspective. Paul Sok is a Southeast Asian man who was incarcerated and then set to deportation, and then that went through several cycles, and now he is an organizer for Youth Justice Coalition in LA, and also an abolitionist. So look them up in case your Google search also doesn't prevents you from finding the people you're looking for. And then I want to say Grace Lee Boggs, as you know, is a unapologetically pro-Black person, and recently passed at 100 years old. And I also had the pleasure of meeting Grace Lee Boggs. So Grace Lee has this great quote where she says, "Love isn't about what we did yesterday, it's about what we do today and tomorrow and the day after." And the archaeology of self is not there to recenter our own stories and recenter our own narratives so much as it is to do the deep work of the collective, to understand that the radical critical love that Dr. JoLLE is telling us about. And what I see in Grace Boggs' quote right here is she's talking about that point in the model of interruption. We interrupt like another thing that Grace Lee Boggs liked to say, so she often spoke very eloquently, and she inspired people so much that, you know, when she said something, people started clapping. I was one of those people once. And she looked around, I remember her looking around the room and said, "Those of you who are clapping, you need to do some more thinking." And that reminded me of Audre Lorde and Convenient Beliefs. It reminds me of the deep work JoLLE asked, like, how deep are you willing to go? Are you gonna sit and clap when we feel good? Or are you gonna go deeper when the work gets harder? I'm looking at Grace Lee here, and I'm thinking about someone who has refused the project of being a wedge group. I think that that's what we all need to refuse this project. And in my particular case, speaking as an Asian identified person, using Asians as a wedge group, we need to refuse this project, to call it out for being anti-Asian as well as anti-Black, and whether we're Asian or not. We have to say that anti-Asian is, to be anti-Asian in that way is to be anti-Black. I've always, and there are real differences between, you know, Black, Indigenous, people of color communities, white communities, and Asian communities. And one of these differences that I really enjoy is how I love it when my Black family and friends are unapologetically Black. I have a friend who's like, he always wears all black, and he always says, "I'm wearing black, I'm black, I'm black." And I just love it, right? And it's really interesting from the Asian perspective because we're never unapologetically Asian. We're always apologetically Asian. Right? I'm sorry, I'm Asian. Asians are sort of our racial realities. We have to be apologetic about everything. But I have one thing that I would challenge all of us to be unapologetic about, Asian or not. And Grace Lee was this: we should be unapologetically pro-Black. We should be unapologetically pro-Indigenous. If you're Asian, you might choose the same, you might make this choice that I'm trying to make. If you're not Asian, you might make that same choice. In other words, you might choose to have a Black radical politics. I want to end with a reading, and I think I'm on time. And it is circling back to this, how hard it is to honor one another's ancestors, and how hard it is to also do the deep work of looking at not only your ancestry, but your present moment and how complicit we might be with colonization. And so I'm gonna read from Channy Nicholas, and she often writes, you can find this on her blogs. She has a book now called Born for This, and it's a quote from that. So it goes like this: "We were made for this, born for this, forged in the fires of all our ancestors' offerings, of their triumphs, of their hopes, dreams, sacrifices, blessings, and prayers. We carry the burden of their suffering, of their mistakes, of their ignorance, abuses, betrayals, in all the right and wrong battles they waged, and won, and lost. We are the sum total of what they shied away from, what they stepped up to, what they were manipulated by, what they were defeated by, and what they were too broken to do. We are the compilation of the ways that they were treated by the powers that be, the ways they benefited from the suffering of others, the way they suffered so that others could benefit. We are the result of the political struggles they struggled with, the land that was stolen from them, or the land that they stole, or both. Most of us come from deeply complex ancestry. We come from genocides and holocausts, from perpetrators and victims, from those that were enslaved or those that enslaved, from the wreckage of colonization or from the colonizers that caused that wreckage, or both. Whatever we come from, it comes down to this: it's our job to make right what we can. It's our job to make right what they did wrong. It's our job to give back what they stole, to take back what was stolen. It's our job to clear the name that we've been given. It's our job to heal the hurt passed to us. It's our job to highlight the honorable plights. It's our job to carry forth their spirit of resilience. It's our job to know what they sacrificed so that we could have the freedoms that we do. It's our job to know what to carry forth in their name. Thanks so much for tuning in, everybody. I'm gonna stop screening. I'm hoping that people can grab the mic and we can have a conversation. Much love to everyone who stayed all this time. I see, I'm just looking through all the chats. Frederick Douglass fought for women's suffrage too. Judith Johnson has a book recommendation about Chinese people who moved to China to Mexico to work. Please do grab the mic. I'm just gonna ramble until someone joins me on the screen, but I actually know the scholar who researches, he calls it I can't remember what it's called, Chino-Mexicano studies or something. But yeah, there were the first people to be quote unquote illegal immigrants in California and be smuggled across the U.S.-Mexico border were actually Chinese immigrants, and they were smuggled by Mexican and Mexican-American people who knew the border well, and faced quite a bit of violence, which was almost never prosecuted. So murders or maimings and stuff like that. But I think it's a complex history. But again, 99% of Asian immigration is not from that time, right? I don't know, does someone want to jump on? JoLLE, you want to come and join me? I really appreciate Dr. Ustri's note. I wanted to mention that she said, I want to mention that I'm rarely identified as Asian in the US. And I do agree, that's this complexity. The default understanding is East Asian. And I think that Pacific Islanders also problematize that because the way that API, Asian Pacific Islander, is supposed to sound inclusive, but it can also sound like assimilative, right? And I think it's significant people who are not allowed to be called Asian, even though they are Asian, right? So there's many Black people who are Asian, for example. There's many Blasians. I think that it's often because of the policing of phenotype, that's also an issue. Yeah, and Usri, like we have incredibly different backgrounds, I think, genealogically, even though in this country the word Asian is applied to both of us differently. Yes, Yolanda's gonna join me. Thank you, Yolanda, you saved me. All right. I don't see you though. Okay. Okay, well, Yolanda tried to join me. I see that we're almost at time. Thank you all for being with me today. It was a tough one. I want to tell a funny story where it's literal archaeology, JoLLE, where I took a group of, we used to take groups of students from Oakland to the mountains and go backpacking and things like that. And we were up there in the Yosemite area, and then we drove over into Sequoia, and then we drove whatever road that is, and it leads us to this ghost town called Bodie. So Bodie is a real ghost town. It's not like a Disneyland ghost town, and people actually lived there till the 70s. In the Stanford got rich there, so they had a gold mine, but Leland Stanford and Stanford University, and there's railroad. Levi Strauss was there, and they had a Chinatown in Bodie. So the ranger was really excited to tell us about the Chinatown. They're mostly laundromats, right? And then the ranger told us this really interesting story. They said, they ran a sonar on the graves. There was a segregated Chinese cemetery. They ran a sonar on the graves, and they're all empty. And to me, that was just the best metaphor for doing this archaeology and finding nothing, not finding ancestors, and not sure what relationship I find to this whole story. But I love that. I sort of love that, this idea that all the graves are empty. All right. JoLLE Shuang is encouraging to grab the mic one more time. Do you see a role for children's young adult literature in this work? I'm so pleased to be on a committee right now with a graduate student who's exploring young adult literature, and specifically around sort of critical racial representations and how deep does it go, right? Because there's very superficial versions where it's kind of like, hey, the characters are Black, or the characters are gay, or, but what does that really mean in terms of the politics and the complexities? And so she's doing that work now. Stay tuned for that dissertation. I'm not going to reveal too much about it yet. So to sign out, I just want to say thank you, everybody. We'll see you at the closing ceremony. And Shuang, did you want to say something? Is that you?
I'm Shuang, and I'm going to say something. So thank you so much, Dr. Yan, for your thought-provoking and inspiring keynotes calling for solidarity and justice. And we're really, really honored to have you and Dr. JoLLE for keynote speeches this year. So if it's possible, I would like to invite Dr. JoLLE, Dr. Bhattacharya, and Dr. Snagransky to be on the stage. Our conference will end very soon, but we would like to give our special thanks to, once again, Dr. Bhattacharya for her wonderful opening speech to welcome attendees and presenters for our conference this year. And we are really, really honored to have you as our new faculty advisor for JoLLE this year. And we look forward to your guidance and support in the future. And of course, we also want to thank Dr. Peter Snagransky for his many years of guidance, support, and service in our JoLLE and Athens communities and community. And once again, thank you so much, Dr. JoLLE, for sharing your wisdom and love with us during your keynote speech and the book club event last night. So we're really, really honored to have you guys with us. And as conference co-chair, Shuang and I, we also want to thank our principal editor, Merida, and our managing editor, Bearby, for leading us this year to become a stronger team and a family. And we want to express our greatest appreciation to our JoLLE families, our principal and managing editor, principal editor Merida, and managing editor Bearby, production editor Jennifer, scholar speak out editor Tam, academic book review editor Dan, and CYAL editor Judy, poetry, fiction, and visual arts editor Latasha, communication editor Sarah, digital content editor Sarah, and our external review board editors. So we really, really thank everybody for being here with us this weekend. And we also want to thank all presenters and attendees for joining us this week. We had a wonderful weekend with all of you. And although the conference is going to conclude right now, but we look forward to continuing this transformative justice work with all of you in the future. And also, our principal editor, Merida, and managing editor, Bearby, will have a session at 4:30 with everybody if you're interested in knowing more about JoLLE and maybe submit your manuscripts to JoLLE. So please go to that session and have a conversation with our principal editor and managing editor. So hope everybody has a great Sunday night, and we hope to see you again next year at JoLLE 2022 Winter Conference. So everybody can stay here and have short conversation with Dr. Yan if everybody still want to do that. And I see the groupie, so let's take a groupie.
This groupie filter is interesting. So I see that Usri jumped on. Did you want to say something? And also Peter jumped on.
Thank you so much, Wayne. That was so inspiring and moving and empowering. And just like Dr. Siri just talked yesterday, this is going to be a transformative moment for our community, for JoLLE as well as LED and UGA, and hopefully we take this momentum and keep it going, and this will lead to good things in the future, and we will forever be grateful for that. And on the personal note, Kalik, I really enjoyed your keynote. So, and thank you so much to the incredible JoLLE community. It has been extraordinary to see this unbelievable student effort. I know about the sleepless nights you all have had, the dozens, maybe hundreds of texts that have flown around, the number of emails. I mean, it's just extraordinary. And this is the culmination of an effort of many months. So we recognize you, we see you, we are so grateful from LLE, from UGA, from the larger language and literacy education community. This is, it's amazing to see the future generation be so mindful and run the world just wants to interrupt my speech. But thank you really, Swan, this was amazing, really amazing an effort. And of course, Merida and the entire team, I couldn't be more proud and grateful for all your efforts. So thank you again.
And there's not much I can add to that other than to agree with everything that Usri just said. And, you know, a lot of us are tuning in this weekend. I know from last semester when I was with the Journal, this work began last spring. And, you know, a lot of us are tuning in and enjoying it now, but this had to be invented out of whole cloth by the conference chairs. And I think they all deserve our appreciation and applause. Because last year, we didn't even know if we could have a conference this year. You know, when COVID hit, everything got turned upside down. And I think that all the work that went in to pull this off online has been tremendous. And I appreciate you know, the whole board participates, but the chairs do most of the work. And I'd just like to thank everybody for joining over a weekend when you could be doing something else altogether. And here we are, and I think that it's been very stimulating, and I just appreciate this whole community so much. So thank you.
Thank you for your patience. Can you hear me? Can you hear me? Oh my gosh, Dr. Wayne. Right, I don't even have the words. First, let me just thank Peter, Yishuan, Shuang. Amazing, amazing and beautiful. Dr. Wayne, you have touched my heart yet again. I don't understand what it is, but I'm going to accept who you are in my life and know that I am blessed. Thank you for your depth, for your brilliance, for getting us to think in ways around history and around present and future that is phenomenal. I love you and I'm grateful to you. And when I say that you're one of my heroes, I mean that from my heart. Professor Bhattacharya, and I hope I pronounced it correctly, yesterday, your presentation was so beautiful. Talk about humanity and talk about opening up the self and inviting others in through love and vulnerability. That was you, and just thank you. I feel very emotional right now. I feel very grateful Thank you for inviting me to the conference this year. I'm a JoLLE supporter. Whatever you need, whenever, I'm there. Thank you, thank you, thank you, thank you, thank you. Wayne, I love you, love you, love you, love you, love you. My God. Amazing when people come together, what can happen when we're not afraid, right?
I'm just so grateful for everyone. And along this journey, we've met a lot of challenges, but it's our collective efforts and collective intelligence that make JoLLE conference happen this year, although we are doing it virtually. And I mean, the conference is over now, but Dr. Yang and Dr. Yuli, Dr. Wayne, sorry, I say it again. And Dr. Bacteria, you left me to think so much. And I mean, this work never ends, and the dirty work, the hard work, and it deserves all our efforts. Maybe this is never ends, but because of we are doing this work together, it gives us the power, gives us the intelligence, and because of the mentorship, and we have the strength and the power to continue doing this work. Thank you so much.
And if I can just really thank Latasha for a moment and Tamara, you know, Latasha last night, what you with night, it's something, sis, that I would like for us to do at another time together with the music, with the creativity, and with the sharing. Thank you for sharing yourself, your soul, and for putting so much out for last night for me. I appreciate you.
Well, I'm speechless. Yuli, you're much better at the thank yous than I am. Thank you for coming back on, and for everything, for the love, for everything.
Yeah. So beautiful, my gosh. I feel, I don't know, it's such a good feeling. Peter, thank you for having the vision, Peter. You know, whatever role, co-conspirator, ally, you know, just a human being who makes the way for others.
Well, thanks, JoLLE. And I just want to always turn that back to the students who've been on the board for the last decade.
Yes.
Well, really, since the journal's inception, but I've been, I think, 9 years now. And you know, the board has done the work. It's really their vision, and my role has been to help them realize it. But I just am full of admiration for a decade's worth of doctoral students who have made this train run. So thanks to all of you.
May it run and never fall off the track, right, Wayne? Now you got me thinking about tracks very differently. And this is why we need each other, I think, just to stimulate our minds and our hearts. You know, I don't see things the same, Wayne, often when I finish conversations with you. And if we can do that and move people towards both education and love, I already see the academy changing. Like, I know it's changing. Let's not get tired. For the JoLLE Student Board, don't get tired. I know you'll get weary, but it's worth it. The fight is worth it.
Love that message. Let's not get tired.
And if I could just, this came up last night, but I think it's worth mentioning again that this conference was founded on the basis of activism, activist research, activist scholarship, civic participation. And from the very beginning, that has produced a feeling at the conference that I don't get very often when I travel to academic conferences, which can be kind of dry. These are very emotional. I think we've seen it here just this afternoon, and that matters. And I'm so happy that has been a sustaining value of the conference. That people walk away moved. And it's different from a conference where you go home after taking a lot of notes and being PowerPointed to death, and you know, you sit there while people talk, and you're by about 2 in the afternoon, you're about ready to, you know, go for something else. But I just think it's very stimulating to have this kind of affective engagement in work that is very unusual. And it's, again, it's the design of the graduate students who have been putting these events together, in part as a reaction against boring conferences. And so I'm so happy to see that sort of work sustained over time.
It might be hard to say goodbye at this point, but I really want to give everyone a moment to take some break. I know this has been a very exhausting weekend. We thank you all for being here, and I look forward to seeing you all next year, because this is a sustaining work, you know. Yeah. And JoLLE is always my family, and we know we will have Dr. Yang and Dr. Ruiz, and you will be with us in the future.
Wow. Yeah.
I'm just looking at you, how beautiful you are. That's all. I mean, I'm just going to hang out here until somebody like stops. That's what I do. I feed these two. I just stay and I wave until everyone leaves. But I'm grateful for every moment. I'm just taking every moment in.
I do not have the button called stop streaming. Anyone has it?
I think Dr. Wayne was saying something. I'm sorry. Did I cross over you?
Not at all.
We do have the button to stop streaming, but like Trent said, it's really hard to say goodbye at this point because everybody is, you know, enjoying all the talks and presentations. So we just really enjoy like being at your presence. So yeah, like Tasha said, it's so hard for us to tear ourselves away.
And I'll be in contact with both of you. I'll text you both right now because I definitely want you and your colleagues to come to my class, each one, to do the workshop that you did this morning around art. So we're kind of already, you know, set up for the spring, but for the fall, I'd like to work out that invitation. I was so impressed. It's just been beautiful. So I feel grateful to be part of the JoLLE family. Can't get rid of me now, Peter and everyone.
Is there a way to get the chats later? I would love to just, people took time to write them and I'd love to read them.
Yeah, you can come back and watch your presentation. And
oh, that's right. Yeah.
It was on fire, Wayne, because you were popping heads with every slide, like pop, pop, pop. At one point I had to get like brain matter off the floor. I'm like, did he say that? Of course he said that. He's Dr. Wayne. So you're gonna love it when you watch it. It was wow. Yeah, moving and brilliant.
Hey, there's a call to get the editorial board on the screen. That would be great. I know like a lot of people, but I don't know everybody. But JoLLE, I want to say, I was just inspired by you. I mean, I had been stressing about this whole thing for a while. And then after yesterday, I stayed up all night thinking about it, worked all morning. I just kept thinking. There's too much. The hard part was trying to know what to not say. You know?
But your call of, and I see Merida, you're beautiful, Merida. Thank you for everything. Yeah! Oh, darling, listen, this is my family. Oh my gosh. But when you talked about putting our ancestors in conversations with other ancestors, like I really need to sit with that because it would be nice to even think about what would a dinner party or a gathering look like of your ancestors and my ancestors and all of our ancestors, you know, like at a cookout. You know, what would we talk about? What would we say? How would we plan? What would they say that they may have done differently or not? Like that idea just gave me a visual of our ancestors being together in one space. It's amazing. And that's what you do. It's like you just spark. So my brain is just sparking in so many different directions.
I just want to give credit where it's due. That's really the work of Super Futures Hot Collective. That's kind of what they do. They have this idea of the specularity where the ancestors sort of hang out
Wow.
But it's real. You know, there's times where I feel like it's very real.